Good evening. All right, we owe you guys an explanation for where we were last week. Well, I, for one, was in Florida.
And I was dealing with a family thing.
So we're very sorry we had to put off our final episode of our Halloween crawl till now. We really hope you guys can forgive us.
But anyway, we back, and the explanation is owls.
Yep, owls.
Owls carried Billy to Florida.
And they carried his family away, and he had to go chase them
carried away
down.
my little brother,
Yeah.
so had to go fight them owls.
But we are going to finish our Halloween saga tonight. I know it's technically the first week of November, but, Halloween is still fresh enough on everyone's minds. We're not totally in the Christmas mindset yet, so we're gonna put this lame dog down. And what are we going to do it with? Well, a silver bullet, of course, because tonight we are talking about some good old-fashioned, snarling, foaming at the mouth werewolves.
Howl with me.
Leedle, 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 lee. Now do SpongeBob's laugh. Don't ever do that again. But anyway, yes, tonight we are back, and we are... we never introduced ourselves. Welcome to Myths and Monsters. I'm Billy Reed.
I'm Curtis Cooper. We talk about monsters and myths.
And we're here to finish our Halloween saga, where we talk about one thing indicative of Halloween every week in October with some spiffy werewolves. So, werewolves. What is a werewolf? Well, you see, werewolves are creatures that exist in a lot of folklores all over the world, but they're predominantly centered in European folklore. Mm-hmm. And werewolves have a couple of different origins in terms of what they do, but basically werewolves are a human that has the ability to turn into a wolf or some kind of wolf-like creature under certain conditions. So
Makes sense.
And we'll get into more of the mythology behind them and how they operate later. But little did you know that actually for about the last 150 years, dating all the way back to the 1880s, sightings of upright walking wolf-like creatures have plagued the American eastern seaboard.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Why does everything happen in the eastern seaboard?
Well, it's actually interesting because they've become so widely spread from as far north as Wisconsin to as far south as Florida over the last 150 years. They say that these things are really the eastern Sasquatch almost. Because Bigfoot sightings are kind of dispersed all throughout North America, but they're mostly epicentered in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
So, these werewolves seem to have the market cornered out here. So what are these creatures people are seeing? Well, they describe them as upright walking wolf-like creatures, about 6 to 8 feet tall.
That's bigger than a man.
Yeah, quite large.
Or woman.
They have the head and lower body of a wolf, but have human-like arms and hands, which is a little unsettling.
Yeah, it's like a halfway transformation almost.
I've heard that these guys can walk on all fours or on two legs, and contrary to a lot of animals that can either walk on twos or fours, these guys seem to be just as comfortable walking on twos as they are on four legs, which is horrifying. And they also are said to have bright yellow, almost amber-colored eyes, and are almost always accompanied by a very distinct smell.
What kind of smell?
Well, witnesses describe it as being a mix of wet dog and dried blood.
Well, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't really make sense. Wet dog, dried blood. I feel like something's got to give there.
Yeah, that's a contradiction. It's like those old Starburst commercials with the albino lifeguard. Man.
Or like a Sour Patch Kid.
Yeah, sour, sweet gun. Man, these werewolves shouldn't even exist. They're an anomaly.
Yeah, like they're a contradiction.
We got to take them down or else they're going to open a hole in the space-time continuum. You got to get in your Doctor Who phone booth.
We definitely know something about Doctor Who.
I think he wears a suit.
And has a magic screwdriver?
Yeah, he's got a Mario screwdriver, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, let's get into some real sightings of these werewolves. So these things are dispersed all the way through the eastern United States, but the epicenter for them is in the north, specifically Michigan and Wisconsin.
Okay.
So odd.
Yeah, those are two random breadbasket states.
Yeah. But there's a lot of wilderness up there.
Sure.
And at least Michigan today still has a breeding wolf population. Wisconsin doesn't. But so let's get into the first recorded sightings of these creatures ever. Now, I just want to warn you guys, these sightings, like when I was reading up on these are a lot scarier than any other sightings we've read before. Like these borderline sound like things out of horror movies.
So, okay, when you say first recorded sighting, this is not so much like the earlier stuff we're going to talk about later. This is more like,
No, like
people
these-
reporting they saw a wolf doing something weird.
Yeah, basically. So the first recorded sighting of a creature like this came in 1887, where a group of loggers in Wexford County, Michigan, who were camping out along the Manistee River, they spotted a creature that they thought was a large dog trying to enter their campsite. So this thing looked kind of mangy and looked kind of hungry, so they tried to chase it away. But it ran inside of a hollow log, so they picked up a stick and started poking inside the log to try to flush it out. And here's where stuff gets weird.
Oh, no.
This thing let out a cry, which I've also heard these creatures let out some kind of scream that sounds like, from what I've heard, a combination of a wolf howling and a human woman being torn to shreds.
Okay. So that's in addition to, like, their howl, or is that their howl that they, like
that's just
howl
their
into the moon?
that's just their howl.
Oh,
Like,
wow. That's
yeah.
horrifying.
Yeah, very scary. But this thing let out a scream, and then it came out of the log and stood on its hind legs. And it screamed at these guys one more time, and then ran off into the woods on its back legs.
That's unsettling. So, like, ran away like a human.
Yeah. Very scary. So, quite a few years later, in 1938, a 17-year-old boy by the name of Robert Fortney was fishing along a riverside in Paris, Michigan. Now, while he was fishing on the other side of the river, a pack of wolves came out of the woods and started walking towards him. And that's no good. You can't have wolves bothering you while you're fishing. So he took out his rifle and he fired a warning shot into the air. And this managed to scare away all of the wolves except for one.
Oh, no.
The biggest wolf stayed behind. And according to Fortney, this thing was big, black, and it had big yellow eyes. And interesting thing that I read in his report is he said he can't prove it, but he swears this wolf was smiling at him.
Oh, no.
So as this thing walked towards him, and right when it got to the other side of the river, it stood up on its hind legs, like the other one we talked about before, and kept walking towards him. So of course he was frozen with fear, but he managed to shoot this thing in the shoulder, and it let out a scream and ran away.
I would assume it was like a human-like scream.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I wasn't there, but I would assume. That's very unsettling. I can imagine that Robert Fortney probably never went back into the woods again.
Yeah, like, I'm never going to fish or go outside again.
So in 1987, so about 50 or so years later, so the residents of a remote cabin out in the woods near Luther, Michigan, started reporting howls and snarls coming from the woods at night, but wolves as well as black bears are native to Michigan, so at first they just wrote it off. But one night, the howls and the growls started to get closer. And as the night went on, they started to hear scratching and biting sounds coming from the windows and doors of the house. So they called up the police, and Deputy Jeff Chamberlain was quickly on the scene, and there were no creatures around the house when he got there, but there were wolf tracks all over the property.
Okay.
And when he investigated the walls, he did find scratches and bite marks all over the doors and windows of the house. So easy enough, you could just write that off as maybe a wolf that decided it was going to get gutsy, but here's the thing. Some of these scratch marks he found were so high up the house that they estimated the creature that had to have done this would have had to have been at least 7 feet tall.
Oh, no. So it would have to be like, if it's a wolf, a large wolf, standing on its hind legs.
And the weird thing is like the only species of bear that are native to Michigan are black bears. And in the world of bears, black bears are actually very skittish. Like they don't really want much to do with people.
Are those the ones that live in Florida, too, or is that
Yeah,
different?
they live in Florida.
Because, like, I was in Florida one time, and, like, a black bear just, like, walked by our window, and it was just, like, doing its thing, just
Yeah.
going through. Like, it didn't want to be bothered.
Like, I've heard stories of people who live in Florida, like a black bear will get into their yard and they'll just chase it away with like a broom or something. Like, the black bears are normally pretty scared of people, so this would be really weird behavior for a bear.
Yeah, can they like, be, like, feral or rabid?
I mean, they could be, and it could be a bear that maybe has just lost its fear of humans, but at the same time, the fact that he found wolf tracks all over the property is a little interesting.
Yeah, that doesn't really
'cause-
track.
Yeah, because something I read is that bears actually have 5 toes on each foot, and wolves only have 4. So
Gotcha.
you couldn't really mistake bear tracks for wolf tracks. So scary. Now let's fast forward a few years to 1994. A lovely elderly couple by the names of David and Mary Pagliaroni.
Nice last name.
That's a $4 last name right there. Now they were on their way home from a party near Honey Creek, Wisconsin. Now they were driving down an old back road and they turned to cross a bridge when they saw a two-legged creature with the head of a wolf and a long bushy tail crossing the road. And this thing did not run from their car. In fact, it just kind of stared them down for a minute. And as they started to back away, this thing jumped off of the 30-foot overpass.
Whoa.
And just ran back into the woods.
That thing's got some shock absorbers on
That
it.
thing's got some hops.
Yeah.
So, ugh. All right, fast forward 10 years to 2004. A young woman by the name of Katie Zahn was out walking in the woods with her friends in Rock County, Wisconsin, and they actually spotted 3 large wolf-like creatures standing on 2 legs that were drinking from a river. And these creatures noticed them and turned around and started coming towards the group, and they scattered and ran back to their car, and all of them managed to make it. But interesting thing is, Katie Zahn herself actually did pass a lie detector test regarding this event.
So she definitely at least thought she saw something.
Yeah, so at the very least, she thinks she encountered some kind of creature in the woods that day that she couldn't quite identify. So do with that what you will. Okay, 2006. This is one of the creepier stories I read. So I'm going to introduce you to a man by the name of Steve Kruger. Now, at the time, he was in college and had gotten a job with the Highway Department of Washington County, Wisconsin at the time to pick up some extra money. However, he was assigned to pick up dead animals off of country back roads.
What a lovely job.
In the topsy-turvy world of road work, that's not one of the glamour jobs. But anyway, one night, really late at night, he stops in the middle of the woods to pick up a dead female deer. And he loaded the deer up into the bed of his truck and climbed up into the cab to fill out the paperwork. And as he was filling the paperwork, he felt something shaking the truck.
Oh, no.
Now, at first, he kind of just wrote it off because he thought it was just wind because it was kind of rainy that night. But he felt it shake again, and that time it shook really, really hard. So he looked in the rearview mirror, and he saw a creature climbing into the bed of the truck that he described as he described it as having the body of a bear but the head of a wolf. And he sped out of there. And when he finally got to civilization, he stopped and looked in the back to see that not only was the deer gone, but the tailgate of the truck was hanging open.
That's weird.
Now, keep in mind that your average female deer weighs over 125 pounds. So whatever this thing was, it was able to lift a whole deer. So
And, like, what's weird to me is the tailgate thing. Because, like, it would be kind of hard to force a tailgate open. You'd
Yeah.
have to almost, like, have the dexterity to open it.
yeah, well, that's another thing I've read is that these things supposedly have human-like hands. So I mean, we don't really know how intelligent they could be.
Yeah.
So that's
At least
Very odd.
all of the popular media says that they go completely feral when they're in wolf form, but we don't know, like,
Yeah.
if a real werewolf.
well, yeah.
Reacts like
we'll
that.
get to that later. But like, are these things werewolves in the traditional sense? Like, are they people at some point, or are they just like this all the time? So.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that later. So in 2010, a fully grown quarter horse was found dead on a farm in Deerfield, Wisconsin. Now, the horse had a large neck wound and was covered in large bites and scratch marks. The bites matched that of a wolf, but according to the veterinarian, these were way too big to be any wolf that was ever recorded in Wisconsin. So,
But was it too big to be any wolf that ever has existed?
not that I know of, but I don't really know. I didn't read that. They just specified in Wisconsin. And
Oh, I gotcha.
also, wolves haven't been native to Wisconsin since like the 1930s because they were hunted to extinction in
Yeah.
Wisconsin pretty quickly because most of Wisconsin is farmland. So as you can imagine, large predators aren't really welcome there.
No, bad for
So,
business.
Yeah, wolves were driven out of there a long time ago. So, I mean, maybe one could cross over from Michigan at some point, but you never know. So 2015, want to hear something? This sighting happened just a few miles away from this spot.
Oh, snap. Where did it happen?
just down the road from here in New Albany, Indiana, along the flood wall on the river.
Lock up your doors, people. The werewolves are coming.
One night in 2015, a New Albany, Indiana woman was out for a walk when she saw a bipedal, that means 2 legs, wolf-like creature run across the flood wall downtown. And she just kind of stopped in fear to stare at this thing for a minute. And in her words, she said this thing gave off an evil energy. Like, she said she never felt pure evil like this before.
Well, yeah, if I saw a wolf walking around on 2 legs, I would not feel good about it.
Yeah, so that's unsettling. So I have another account to talk about here, but this is the 3rd show in a row we've had to do this, but such is the way of the Cryptid podcast. I am calling it right now. I'm issuing a big content warning for this one.
Don't worry, I have one of those too.
If you are squeamish or have small children present, tune us out for a couple minutes here, or if you're listening to the playback on YouTube, just skip ahead the next couple minutes because this one is gruesome. So
maybe we should start doing a thing on YouTube where we give like the
time codes.
Yeah, the time codes of when this stuff happens.
But anyway, so I'm going to take you guys back to 2015.
Paint us a picture.
A small town in Georgia. Now, this small town in rural Georgia, Washington, Georgia to be precise, in 2015, sightings of an upright walking wolf-like creature started popping up there. But, I mean, small town, stuff like that happens all the time where people think they see monsters in the woods. So local authorities didn't think much of it. Mm-hmm. So I want to introduce you to a lovely older lady by the name of Netta Lee Adams. Now, she was 81 years old in 2015. She was a beloved member of the Washington, Georgia community. Everybody liked her. And she had a hobby where every day she would go out to the woods and pick up metal cans to just help pick up the litter and everything.
Oh, that's nice.
Now, one morning, she went out and she didn't come back.
Oh, no.
So after being gone for a few hours and nobody hearing from her, the police went to her house to check up on her. And her back patio looked like a bomb went off. All the furniture was destroyed. There were bloody paw prints all over the floor. There were big slashes in the cushions on her lawn furniture. It was a massacre. So the police searched the woods to try to find her, and this is where it gets absolutely disgusting. So her body was found in a ditch in the middle of the woods. And oddly enough, her clothes were torn off, which that's uncharacteristic of any animal that I can think of.
Completely torn off?
Yeah, like she was completely unclothed.
Weird.
And also her body was partially eaten, but that's par for the course. Yeah. Now, saliva was found on her body and it was tested. Now, obviously, since the samples were heavily contaminated from being out in the elements and from being cross-contaminated with her own blood, it wasn't determined what exactly did this, but all that we could find was that it was some sort of canine DNA. Now, the town coroner examined her body, and in his report, he said that they say this was a dog attack. All the evidence points to this being some kind of dog attack, but based on the shape her body is in, this looks more like a shark attack.
Oh, man.
So
that's grisly.
Yeah. Now, local police and animal control did search the woods, but no coyotes or feral dogs were found anywhere near her property. And as of today, the official cause of death was simply listed as dog attack.
Man, that's wild.
Yeah. So, we talked a couple weeks ago about the Black Panthers and how, they were gutsy for attacking people, but these werewolves, they go one step beyond. They don't even let people run away.
Yeah, so, that's got no chill.
Yeah, that's a horrible situation. But to lighten it up a little bit, I have a bit of a funny one here. This one doesn't have anything to do with anything. I just found this and I thought it was funny.
It's our podcast.
So,
we do what we want with it.
In 2010, a young man known only as TJ in Atlanta, Georgia, called 911 and told the police that he was about to turn into a werewolf and needed Pepto-Bismol. And midway through the call, his stepfather takes the phone away from him, and the 911 operator asked him if he had any pre-existing health conditions, and his stepdad simply replied with, "He's got asthma." Now, police were sent to the house, but I couldn't find any records of what actually happened that night.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
I like to play, that game is just, that story is just such a fun mental game called Guess What Combination of Narcotics Led to This. And, here's what kills me about that is, Let's just humor this man for a second and say that he is about to turn into a werewolf. What on God's green earth is Pepto-Bismol going to do for him?
I mean, I guess before people turn into werewolves, they have tummy aches.
Like, what did he eat? What did he eat? Some bad
Something
pizza?
bad.
Did he hit the Golden Corral on a full moon? Like, what happened there?
I mean, to be fair, every time I go to the Golden Corral, I feel like I'm going to turn into a werewolf. So.
That's fair. Golden Corral's strange energy. So, those are just a couple of modern stories of encounters with werewolf-like creatures and Pepto-Bismol. But werewolf myths have been around for a very, very long time and exist in a lot of different cultures. So, would you mind telling us where exactly this myth got started?
Yeah, let's dig down deep into some older mythology surrounding these werewolves. So, okay, back in the 15th and 16th centuries, there began to be these accusations of lycanthropy, which is, Billy?
Werewolf syndrome, basically.
Yep, which is a condition where people are like, oh, I turned into this wolf and it's weird. And these accusations actually developed almost exactly parallel to witch accusations in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, most early werewolf trials took place in Switzerland, and they peaked in the 1600s. But here is an account from the late 1500s where we have the earliest, I guess, popular werewolf that everybody knew about at the time. So let's talk about Peter Stump.
I've heard of this man.
Yep. And if you all want a more in-depth breakdown of Peter Stump, I would definitely recommend checking out the Lore podcast because they definitely do an excellent werewolf episode on this.
Yeah, they do a really good one.
So, Peter Stump died in 1589. No one knows exactly how old he was because he was just a poor farmer back in the 1500s, so no one had like super accurate records back then. But he is perhaps the most well-known of the werewolf trials at this time. Now, he was a farmer living in Germany, and basically, there were accusations made against him that he was doing all these horrible things, which we'll get into. And after being tortured, that being stretched out on a rack, which is not fun, he confessed to a few things. Now, mind you, this is after being tortured, and this is where I'm going to issue the content warning. Now, I'm not going to give all the specifics because they're too grisly for me to want to talk about. But if you want to look it up, look it up. So he confessed to having practiced black magic since he was 12. He confessed to being given a magic belt by the devil himself that allowed him to turn into a wolf. And as a result of this, he confessed to engaging in serial killings, animal killings, cannibalism, and incest.
What on earth does incest have to do with being a wolf?
I have no idea. But his daughter was executed too.
Well, that's
along
not
with
good.
him.
Did she commit any crimes or just executed by association?
It was mainly due to the incest claims.
Yeah, that wasn't looked upon too greatly at the time.
Nor should
still
it
isn't
ever be.
looked upon greatly, but nowadays if somebody does that, we get them therapy. We don't kill them.
Yeah.
I'm just a firm believer that everyone deserves a second chance.
Yeah, 1589 they weren't as understanding. So okay, let's back it up a little bit and let's talk about Germany at the time. So Germany at that time was going through a lot of religious turmoil like a lot of Europe was. Now, Germany started out Catholic and then became Protestant through like Reformation, stuff like that, and it was just like sweeping through the land. Now, around the time that Peter Stump was engaged in all of his alleged shenanigans, the country was retaken over by the Catholics. Now, the Archbishop for the Catholics was super aggressive, and he was hunting down all the Protestants. Now, it's been theorized by experts that Stump was most likely a convert to Protestantism. So many theorize that this was a ploy by the Archbishop at the time to make an example of a Protestant. Now, one thing to consider is, in this German area, this was the only trial, werewolf, witch, or otherwise, that happened in this area. Mm-hmm. Now, normally, in like the case of like the Salem witch trials and other like European hotspots,
turns into a big mass hysteria thing.
Yeah, there's like a bunch of them, and a bunch of people get like executed for no reason. But this was the only one that happened at this time, and that's weird. So it has led some experts to believe that this was done for religious, political reasons. Now, this does not mean that Stump was completely innocent. From all of the accounts we have, he was most definitely a serial killer.
Yeah, most likely.
And that, to me, means that I don't think he was telling the truth about having a magic belt.
No, more than likely not. He probably had some sort of psychosis.
Either that or
when people get tortured,
Yeah,
they say some
exactly.
crazy things. But
yeah, because how many alleged witches confessed to being witches after they were tortured enough times?
Yeah. Well, because a lot of them said, if you confess, we'll let you go.
Yeah.
So.
And then they just killed them. So, a lot of the werewolf hysteria arose for the same reasons the witch hysteria arose, and not a lot of men were accused of being witches. So my personal theory, as this was kind of like the male version of the witch trials, where it basically just allowed the church to control everybody. Because
Yeah,
if you're given that black mark of you're this evil demonic creature, then you're gonna die, and everybody's gonna be terrified.
Yeah.
Because after he was executed, and I'm not even gonna say how he was executed because it's so horrific.
I don't want to know.
Even for a serial killer. But after he was executed, his head was put on a post, which was also the device they used to kill him was put on it, and they stuck it in the middle of town to warn people, don't you be a werewolf.
Yeah,
or
don't
more
do it.
likely, don't you be a Protestant.
So if there's a couple of takeaways you should take from listening to Myths and Monsters, it's that A, owls are the ultimate evil.
Yeah, evil.
And B, medieval religion is bad.
Yeah, pretty much. Medieval religion, because it was the power structure at the time.
Yeah, nobody wanted to be your friend in medieval religion.
Yeah, religion and politics are one and the same in medieval times, because that's just the way that people viewed the world.
Well, look at something like the Jersey Devil that we talked about. That whole creature was just a result of Ben Franklin trying to get political and business power from a family. So, a lot of cryptids and creatures can just be born from social tension at a time.
The real enemy is man.
All right, calm down there, Scooby-Doo.
I know who's responsible for this. Oh, look, a random white guy.
But the thing is all these werewolf trials from Europe back in the day, that just doesn't entirely explain for me these stories of these upright wolf creatures that have popped up in North America. I feel honestly they might just be totally unconnected, because I feel the whole reason these things have been called werewolves is because that's what they look like.
Yeah.
So.
And we will talk about that in a
Yeah,
second.
when we get to some percentages.
But there are a few other miscellaneous origins that I found interesting that I'll just lightly touch on here. Now, the actual, where the medieval version of werewolves came from is most likely from, Germanic paganism, because they heavily use the wolf in all of their symbology and, their religion and stuff like that. So that's probably another, reason the church picked the wolf to use to not only subjugate their own people, but also to be these other German pagans are evil. And there were a few classical Greek tales. One is of the Neri, which changed into wolves once a year, which is a little bit different from once a month with the full moon. And then there's the most popular Greek myth, which is the story of Lycan.
Oh, I've heard that one, yeah.
Which is basically the story of this dude who was punished by the Greek gods by being transformed into a wolf as punishment for murdering a child.
So to punish this guy for murdering a child, you give him a form that would be a way more adept for murdering more children.
Yeah, you turn him into a murder machine.
Good on you, Zeus. Good on you.
So, Billy, I have a question for you that I don't know if we'll do every show, but it's fit the last two shows. So, werewolves. Whether they're real or not, what would it take for them to be real, and how would you explain it scientifically?
All right, so I've been thinking about this ever since we did the vampires a couple of weeks ago. So for our werewolf origin, All right, so for our scenario, these are creatures that we have to explain scientifically. These are creatures that exist in our natural world. There's nothing supernatural about them. They just are the way they are.
The most logical explanation.
So these guys are not going to be humans that turn into these creatures. These are just going to be werewolves all the time, for lack of a better term. So I thought, since it would be fun, since werewolves and vampires are commonly associated with each other for some reason...
Thanks, Twilight.
Yeah, no, it's really weird because like vampires and werewolf, like those creatures came from like totally different parts of Europe and like totally different mythologies. So I'm never gonna understand how they got to be associated with each other so much, but whatever, that is what it is. So since they're associated with each other, I'm going to tie these werewolves' origin into the origin of our vampires from the last episode.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
So for this, I drew inspiration from one of the most interesting evolutionary arms races in the fossil record, that of the T-Rex and the Triceratops. So you see, ever since those two families of dinosaurs showed up in the fossil record, they were on this evolutionary track of constantly trying to one-up the other one. Like, by the time it got to the T-Rex and the Triceratops, each one of them was perfectly evolved to kill the other. And that's what I kind of imagine happening here. So in our vampire scenario, vampires were cavemen who never left the cave and just adapted to life in a more subterranean environment.
Makes sense.
Well, you see, modern-day domestic dogs came from prehistoric dire wolves that cavemen domesticated and over the generations just selectively bred them into the dogs we have today.
Makes sense.
So where vampires would have been cavemen who never left the cave, I like to think werewolves would have been dire wolves who never got buddy-buddy with humans.
Ooh, I like this.
So these guys would have stayed behind and still preyed on the humans that still lived in the cave. Now, as the generations went on and natural selection did its thing, and the humans that they preyed on got stronger with the whole vampire thing, well, the wolves would have to fight fire with fire. So, the way I see it, these wolves would have to evolve to fight these vampires. So, they would have to be a lot bigger, like probably somewhere in like the 500-600 pound range.
And more adaptable.
A lot more adaptable. So that's where I like to think they would get the ability to walk on 2 legs or 4 legs.
Oh, like gorillas or something like that.
Yeah, basically. But since vampires were a subspecies of humans, so for all intents and purposes, their primary prey would be a species of human, they would have to be a lot more adept at walking on 2 legs, because they would have to be ready for anything these vampires could throw at them. So... Now, these werewolves, I feel like there probably wouldn't be very many of them, considering their populations would probably be side by side with the vampires.
Yeah.
So there probably wouldn't be very many of them, but there would be a few isolated populations of them out in the wild, wherever these vampires were at. And they wouldn't have much to do with ordinary people, like, just run-of-the-mill humans very often, because they'd primarily stick to the vampires as their prey. Mm-hmm. But in our scenario, I like to think that as time went on and vampires got smarter and eventually decided to go integrate into human society, the werewolves would have lost their food source at that point, so what is there to do but just get to hunting regular humans?
Makes sense to me.
And that would be where our werewolf myths come from.
So how many of them would you say in this model would exist today?
Well, considering these guys would have had to have ventured beyond their hunting grounds and go to new territories, a creature like this would easily be able to take over a food chain anywhere.
Yeah.
So I like to think in some areas they probably exploded in population, but thing is, as farming took off in Europe back in the day, and wolves were seen as more of a threat, I like to imagine that as wolves were getting hunted off, these guys probably got hunted off too.
More than likely.
And
most of them probably just appeared as regular wolves to a lot of people, because even if they were equally comfortable standing on 2 and 4 legs, they were probably way faster running on 4 legs.
Yeah, they would cover a lot more ground on 4 legs. So I'd imagine people would probably cross paths with these things at some point or another, and that's where we would get a lot of our werewolf myths. And considering these would just be ordinary creatures that existed in our world, obviously it would take anything to kill them, not just a silver bullet. So they would probably be pretty easy to kill. So I'd imagine most of them have probably been driven out of Europe in our speculative scenario. But one way or another, they made their way to the United States somehow, whether it was on a ship or whatever. And in the northern and eastern United States, where humans have driven out most large predators, because here's the thing, when like the first settlers came here in Indiana, we had grizzly bears, we had wolves here, but like as people settled, they forced most big predators out west. So like here in Indiana, we've got bobcats, coyotes, foxes, and like the occasional mountain lion. So
Small boys.
yeah, so here in our neck of the woods, these werewolves would be pretty unchallenged in terms of competition. So I like to think they could take over the ecosystem here pretty well. And that's an interesting thing I noted when I was looking at these sightings, is that a lot of the states that in the east that don't have a lot of sightings of these creatures seem to be states that have big predators.
That would make sense.
Like when I was looking at the southern states, I was shocked at how many sightings Louisiana and Mississippi had, because there are not only black bears but alligators in both of those states. So that would be two big predators that these things would be competing with. But maybe some of them have more courage than others. So yeah, in our speculative universe where all cryptids are real, werewolves are simply just dire wolves that never got comfy with humans and just evolved to kill vampires. So
Makes sense to me.
there you have it. We have now scientifically rationaled werewolves into existence.
They exist.
What do you have to say about that?
I think it's a wonderful theory myself.
Thank you.
And okay, I will put on my skeptic hat for your lecture here. So, what's to say that these aren't just wolves? Because if what you said is true, that these are just dogs that were not domesticated from a much earlier space than regular wolves, wouldn't they just be big wolves? What would actually lead to them having to learn to stand on two legs? Because that's the one disconnect.
Well, the only thing that I can think of is they would either have to adapt to like an environment where they'd have to climb, which I think is pretty unlikely,
Yeah.
or they would have to adapt to hunt some sort of prey that would require them to, stand
Or at
on
least
two legs.
at the very least, like standing on two legs would be like an intimidation factor to like prey, or even like potential like same species like competitors.
Yeah, because that's what gorillas do. Because like gorillas will mostly walk on four legs, but they'll stand on twos whenever they're trying to intimidate
Makes
other
sense.
gorillas. So, yeah, I feel like if these things are real, they probably spend most of their time on four legs, but they'll stand on two legs when they need to. So, yeah, but I realized that with this werewolf thing, this is a big job, and I needed to reach out to someone who could provide us with the proper intel. So
Oh, are you talking about who I think you're talking about?
it's been a while, but I reached out to our correspondent, Deep Matt.
He's got
and
boots on the ground.
He ventured off into the wild unknown to see if he could get to the bottom of this werewolf conundrum, and he sent me a log of his findings, and here's what he had to say.
Greetings, I am Deep Matt, an investigator tracking goons and goobs in your community. I've been on the trail of a werewolf for many moons now. This beast has been slaying many bears in the mountain ranges, and as defender of all woodland creatures, I could not let this slide. I laid out a fresh batch of tilapia, and I was able to lure out the beast with this offering. I then used my wrestling moves to pin the beast, but then it transformed into a human woman. She told me that she had been in fact not slaying real bears, but rather bear beast, who had been terrorizing her village for centuries. After a nice cup of ectoplasm tea and Bush's baked beans, we decided to go out on an intel date, and we've been going steady for a while. I thought I could never love again after my love, Deep Cynthia, perished in a mysterious brush fire, but it appears I was mistaken. Please tell your listeners to submit any date ideas to me, Deep Matt. Stay safe, listeners.
So what say you about Deep Matt's investigation?
Well, bear beasts.
Yeah, that's a given.
This werewolf was fighting off the bear beast,
Yeah.
so an essential part of the ecosystem.
Yeah, gotta uphold the balance, any of that. Whatever they said in the new Godzilla movie, I don't know.
She's bringing the balance like Thanos.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Deep Matt got him a woman.
Congratulations, Deep Matt.
I'm happy for him. So, yeah, that's what Deep Matt had to say.
He'll just have to stay away from her when the moon gets high.
So, shall we move on to some percentages?
Percentage time. All right, so Billy, I have a few percentage questions for both of us today.
Okay.
So let's start with the least likely. So, percentage chance that at least one of these accounts is of a human, male, female, otherwise, that every now and then, for some triggering reason, we're not even going to specify the triggering reason, turns into a wolf-like creature and goes and messes stuff up.
Yeah, I'm not buying that. I'm sorry, I try to be pretty open-minded when it comes to crypto stuff, but I don't know. That just sounds a little too far-fetched.
It just doesn't
for
make
me.
sense.
Yeah, like, I can't think of any logical reason that would ever cause that, Like, we in science these days, we've reached a point where, like, genetic mutation and gene manipulation are actually pretty doable and within the realm of possibility. But here's the thing is, like, first of all, it's never been done to that kind of extreme. So, like,
Genes can't really change once a month either.
yeah. So, like, in theory, maybe we could give a person, like, a wolf's sense of smell or, like, one or two wolf-like traits, but, like,
They would have them permanently.
yeah, they would have them permanently. They'd never be able to turn them off. And I don't think we're at an era of genetic research where we could fully turn someone into a wolf,
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's just no scientific, rational way to explain someone turning into these things. So, I'm going to give that about a 2% chance.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a big fat 0.
Ah, but that's reserved for the Flatwoods monster.
0.5%. Yeah, I forgot about Flatwoods. He belongs in his 0 bin all by himself.
Yeah, because he's an owl.
All right, so question number 2. This is a wolf that stands on 2 legs from time to time that messes stuff up.
That's pretty likely. I think if these things are real, that's probably what they are, is just some species of wolf that has figured out how to walk on 2 legs. So, I'm gonna, I'll give that about let's say about a 55% chance.
Wow, you were real close to what I was going to give. I was going to give it a 50% coin flip that this is some undocumented species of wolf.
So we're on the same train of thought there. It's nice. We're like brothers, only closer.
So there might be an undocumented species of wolf, there might not. And okay, regardless, do you think that any of these encounters were of some undocumented wolf, whether they actually walked on 2 legs or not?
I think that's extremely possible, especially the ones in Wisconsin, considering, like, the DNR of Wisconsin, like, from what I was reading up, the Department of Natural Resources is incredibly confident that there are no breeding populations of wolf in Wisconsin at all. So, like, they're very confident that there are no wolves up there. Now, Michigan's a bit of a different story, but weird thing about Michigan is that the wolves weren't documented in Michigan from, like, the 1800s all the way up until 2005. So wolves have only very recently reappeared in Michigan.
That's strange.
So I think it's possible that these could be some species of wolf. Maybe about like a 70% chance that these are
Makes
just
sense, yeah.
some type of wolf species. But yeah, the walking on 2 legs, I mean, I'd have to see it myself, you know?
A little more far-fetched.
Yeah.
So I guess it could be just like a type of dire wolf or like an offshoot of a dire wolf that
Yeah.
maybe not that big, but like close to that big, that like kind of survived on its own for a while and just kind of did its own thing.
Just kind of managed to avoid us for a long
Yeah.
time, which, I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, how many species have lived on this planet that we're never going to know about? Because either A, their remains never fossilized, or B, there's only like 2 or 3 of them left alive today.
Yeah.
So,
Or
That's a
C,
good
they just live in
possibility.
the ocean. We know nothing about the ocean.
yeah, no, we know absolutely nothing about our own ocean. We know more about space than we do our own ocean. But,
We'll definitely be doing some aquatic creatures.
oh,
here
that
soon.
we shall within the next few weeks, probably. So, Got any more percentage questions for me?
Nope. That was pretty. I think that pretty much covers it.
I got one.
All right, give it to me.
Percentage chance that these creatures are some sort of known animal that people are just misidentifying.
Now that's interesting because there's not a lot of animals that walk on two legs that would fit like a wolf. Like
No.
because like wolves are a lot more gaunt than anything else
Yeah.
that walks on two legs.
The only thing I could feasibly think of would be like maybe a sick bear. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
maybe just a emaciated, mangy bear.
And like some of
But-
these accounts did say that like it had like the bulk of a bear.
Yeah. But a lot of the accounts I read said that it had like a more human-like torso, you know? Like bears are more just pure muscle. They don't
Yeah.
really, they're just pure bulk. So, yeah, I'm not really sure on that one. But what would you say? Percentage chance that these are just some kind of regular creature that people are just misidentifying?
I mean, I think a lot of this could just be like we've talked about the fear factor
Yeah.
and like adrenaline. So I'd probably give it like let's say a 72% chance.
I'd give that about a 60% chance, maybe.
That's fair.
Because, like, you know, the one that really got me thinking about that was the guy I talked about who saw the werewolf climbing into the back of his truck when he picked up the dead deer, you know? Because, like, that's a really creepy story. I can't even imagine what I would do if I was in that situation. But, like, here's
yeah.
the thing. Like, you know, you live out in the boonies. So how many times do you find yourself, like, driving on those back roads in the woods late at night and you're just always, like, looking over your shoulder to make sure there's nothing creeping around, you know?
Oh, all the time.
Like, that's just such a creepy environment. And, like, way deep in the northern woods of Wisconsin, when your job is to get out of your car and pick up the dead animals that you see, like, I can only imagine how the adrenaline would be going through you at that point. So
Oh yeah, definitely.
I feel like at that point, any animal you see, you could easily misinterpret as being a werewolf. You know what I mean?
And as like the Flatwoods monster case, like when you have endorphins running, like you can see anything.
Yeah. And, like, also the whole environment of just being deep in the woods, like, when it comes to monsters that we associate with, like, being deep in the woods, werewolves are one of the top ones, you know?
Yeah.
Because, like, the Flatwoods Monster, how that was a bunch of kids who saw a meteor that night and immediately thought, oh, holy crap, it's an alien.
Yeah.
So they get thinking alien, so they think they see an alien. So, like, you're in the woods, you're thinking like wolves, you're thinking bears, so then you see a werewolf. So I think that's extremely possible. But honestly, like, these werewolf accounts are just, and the fact that there's so much common ground with all the sightings, like, there's a lot that the eyewitnesses can agree on with these.
That's true.
So that's very strange. And, like, the whole bloody dog smell that these things seem to come with, that's
That's weird.
unsettling to say the least. And not to mention the fact they're, like, as slim as it might be, there's a slight chance that these things could have claimed a human victim at one point or another. And that's, you know, I only included that lady's story because there's a lot of gray area in terms of what actually got her. And there are a lot of people out there who actually think it was one of these werewolf creatures, especially because, like, there were sightings of that nature in that area at the time. So,
Yeah, it adds to the hysteria.
yeah, it's possible. And, like, there is a lot of weird stuff, like ripping her clothes off. Dogs don't do that.
Yeah.
And the fact that the town coroner even said that it looked more like a shark attack than a dog attack, that's a little extraordinary for me. But just the fact that these things could be out there and, like, the possibility that they could have claimed a human victim at some point, that's
unsettling.
yeah, that's a little creepy. So, you know, at the end of the day, I'm going to say this much. I think werewolves in the traditional sense, as far as humans that can turn into these creatures, I think those are more than likely not real. Wouldn't you say?
I would say busted.
But in terms of these upright wolf creatures that may or may not just be some weird species of wolf, I would say that's more inconclusive than anything else.
I'd agree.
I think a lack of physical evidence is what's kicking that one in the butt for me. But I think it's still very possible, and I think when you look at it from a weird evolutionary scientific perspective, it's not totally implausible.
Most
But
definitely.
it would just be a really, really weird species. But so yeah, I think we can go ahead and close the book on werewolves, wouldn't you agree?
I would say we covered it from every feasible angle.
So I hope you guys enjoyed that. We finally put an end to our Halloween crawl, albeit a week late.
Halloween
so-
is officially over, everyone.
Yep, you can officially put your Christmas tree up. Don't actually put your Christmas tree up. At least wait a couple more weeks to put your Christmas tree up.
Put your cornucopias up.
Yeah, don't be that guy. Go buy a Thanksgiving wreath.
Be thankful.
Yeah, exactly. Be thankful. So we now that our Halloween crawl is over, we have some great episodes lined up for you for the next few weeks. Next week, we're coming back and we are doing an on-site investigation this weekend. I'm so excited because it's not about ghosts. Oh, it's not about ghosts.
It ain't no ghosts.
We are going to be investigating our very own local cryptid, the Kentucky Goatman.
Goatman time.
So if you never hear from us again, it was the Goatman. But
He or she got us.
so yeah, we're going to be talking about the Goatman next week. We have some more stuff lined up for you. Eventually, we're going to talk about the Mothman, some aquatic cryptids, and oh boy, our Thanksgiving special, which is going to be our cryptid fight night because we're 12.
We're gonna make a bracket. We're gonna bring in Brad and maybe some other guests, and it's gonna be a debate.
Oh yeah, we're 12, so we kind of have to talk about who would kick whose butt in a fight between
Absolutely.
Bigfoot versus the werewolf. Oh man, that's going to be a tough one. And yeah, Bigfoot's going to be in our bracket, even though we haven't talked about him yet.
There will be a big blowout for Bigfoot at some point.
Well, yeah, because there's so much information available about Bigfoot, we can't cram it into an hour.
Yeah.
So we will try to do a 2-hour show one day where we talk about Bigfoot. But if anything, that'll be like our season finale.
That'd be fun.
So, but Bigfoot will be on our cryptid bracket because you can't have a cryptid bracket without Bigfoot.
It'll be a tease for things to come.
Could we have the Loch Ness Monster on the bracket? Because I feel like the Loch Ness Monster wouldn't be much of a fighter on land,
That's true. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
We'll probably pick like 8 or 12.
So anyway, that about does it for werewolves. As always, you can follow our social medias. We are at monsters_myths on Twitter and at myths_monsters on Instagram. As always, I am Billy Reed.